If you have ever second guessed your service minutes, or if you have struggled to justify placement for your students, or if you didn't really feel great or that you had the time enough that you wanted to have to complete your IEP paperwork or your assessing for your students, or that you just felt that your IEP maybe wouldn't hold up under scrutiny, then you're in the right place, because I've got some practical hacks that's going to give you some great clarity, some confidence, and also a real defensible plan in case you are audited or in case anybody is going through your IEP with a fine-tooth comb. I'm going to give you 5 hacks that's going to help you with this, and make sure you stay to the end, because the last 2 that I give you are going to literally shave hours off of your report writing time and the whole process. I do want to just give a quick little disclaimer and let you know I am not an attorney. What I know is what I've learned from being in this field for a really long time, but also from being in a lot of contentious IEP meetings or learning myself about how to really get my IEP through and through rigor. What I have learned, I've learned from being in the field, but I'm not a lawyer. If you have a student that has a hearing loss, then they need to be tested for special education. So we're starting at the basics here. I can't tell you how often I walk into a school and I'll see a kiddo run by and I'll be like, that child's got hearing aids. How come I have no idea who that child is? How long has that child had hearing aids? And then I have to play a detective and find out how long they've had hearing aids, who they are, and then really try to get them in for testing for special education. So just a little very basic kind of umbrella here. If a student has a hearing loss at all, we should test them for special education under deaf and hard of hearing. There's some confusion about this in a lot of schools. To be assessed for special education under deaf and hard of hearing, our students do not need to have any academic concerns. It doesn't matter if people are saying we didn't want to test them for special education because they're doing great. It doesn't matter. If they are starting to have some academic concerns, they do not need to go through what we call RTI, or response to intervention, or MTSS, which is basically the same thing. It's basically the pullouts and the extra supports before you would refer to special education. When you have a sensory loss, you don't need to do that. You don't need to go through those avenues. And a lot of special educators don't understand that. They haven't had kids with sensory losses because we're the smallest percentage of kids in special education, one of them. We also do not need to wait for their speech to be unintelligible before they're tested for special education. But what we do need is a teacher for the deaf and hard of hearing to be involved in the assessment and at the meeting. Schools just really need to be aware that anytime you've got a kiddo with any documented hearing loss, then we need to get them assessed, and we need to have a teacher of the deaf involved in that. I also run into it frequently that a child may not qualify for deaf and hard of hearing, but yet somehow they are qualified under speech and language. And that's reversed. That's reversed because the majority of the time, the reason that they are having speech and language issues is because of their hearing loss. What they're qualified for is basically the reason that they are struggling for other things. What we need is we need that eligibility for deaf and hard of hearing. Under this eligibility, it is a 3-pronged process that we go through. First of all, we need a documented hearing loss. Then after that, we need to identify that there has some impact for that child. After that, we need to identify whether that requires specially designed instruction. I know we're just starting off with the basics before we step into these hacks, but I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page about this. So I like to think, is the child going to learn the strategies and skills without somebody teaching it to them? Or are they going to be able to learn it on their own? With a hearing loss, the needs are so unique, and it's not usually something that they can learn from any other teacher, especially when we're talking about hearing aid technology or self-advocacy skills. It's typically best taught by the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. That's where we are starting. This is where things get a little bit confusing to a lot of administration and a lot of people. I think in deaf education, we are well aware that the impact of hearing loss impacts everything around us. So when we are looking at a student, we need to consider academics and language, but we also need to consider those social and emotional needs, communication, functional skills, and transition. Now, I see a lot of times people are saying, I think we need to dismiss them because they're doing fantastic. And my school doesn't really want us to teach self-advocacy, but actually, self-advocacy is a huge part of transition. And self-advocacy is also embedded into the academics, into the language, into the social and emotional needs, and our communication functional skills. Let me just backtrack. State eligibility definitions vary. So your state may have different eligibility needs than my state. I am showing you Wisconsin's eligibility here. Step number one, we need to make sure that we have a documented hearing loss. Now, in Wisconsin, you can document it whether it's with or without the hearing aid, and it can be fluctuating. I know that some states have different definitions of that. But then we need at least one other item under educational performance. So notice that this is educational performance. A lot of times people say it's all about the grades. It is not all about the grades. And there is documentation upon documentation that talks about it is not all about the grades for our students. In Wisconsin, we need one thing that is checked. So here, the student's decreased ability to detect sound has adverse effect on academic performance. So phonemic awareness, they're missing their S's, they're lacking vocabulary, they don't have the language for the general word knowledge, independent reading with comprehension, but also the students have a decreased ability to detect sound, and it has an adverse effect on speech perception. So even if you've got a student here in Wisconsin who their language is right on par, but if they are missing out on speech perception, and this we can test in a noisy room, when the teacher is at a distance, when they can't see the teacher's face, we can test that and we can identify that, and that can qualify them under deaf and hard of hearing eligibility in Wisconsin. And then we also have their speech production. So if they are not intelligible, then that qualifies them. But if they are intelligible, then we still have this other thing down here. And this is the adverse effect on communication. We're looking at students' acquisition or expression, which is vocabulary comparable to same age peers, general knowledge, ability to ask questions, apply information, communicate effectively with peers and adults in a variety of situations in order to have needs met. So if they're unable to communicate what their needs are, then that is self-advocacy. So you'll have to really dig into what your state's criteria is for this, but it's very possible that it's very similar. If you have ever had an administrator who doesn't know this stuff, who's not super familiar with this, you are not alone, because oftentimes administrators might not know. And I'm going to be honest, it's not the administrator's fault that they don't know. Because when I say we, I'm talking about the niche of students with hearing loss. We're a very small percentage of students in special education. And every administrator that I know who doesn't have a background in deaf and hard of hearing, which is most administrators, I ask them, tell me about what you learned in your master's degree or your PhD about meeting the needs of kids with hearing loss. And they tell me, I had one day. We talked about sensory losses for maybe one day or maybe one week. So they just haven't been exposed to it. But I will say, as soon as they Google it, as soon as they start asking the questions, the information is very available to them. So if you have an administrator who is unfamiliar with this, then we really want to have patience with that, because they probably haven't been exposed to it, legit. But that doesn't mean that they can't learn it or can't get online and start seeking it out, because it is different. Deaf and hard of hearing, as well as visually impaired, is completely different from any other area of special education. I love this book, and you can just Google Purple Book for Deaf Students, and this will come up for you. This is optimizing guidelines for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. And in the Professional Academy program, we have this embedded, but it is also available on the internet. I love it because it was created by administrators for administrators. So this offers guidelines that's recommended to be used by states and districts and schools. It provides information on the legal requirements, best practices, and implementation. It even has self-assessment checklist that schools can use to double check to make sure that they are following the guidelines and providing for their DHH students. So if you have an administrator who isn't really understanding or pushing back, make sure you get into the professional academy and you find this purple book, or you Google purple book deaf. Cheryl DeConde Johnson helped write this book. She is amazing. She is an audiologist. She is just such a great advocate for our students. She did a training for the Online Itinerant that is going to be launching in the fall. So if you're a member of the Professional Academy, you will have access to this starting in the fall. If you're not a member, this is a great reason for you to join. It walks through all of that book and all of the legal expectations that is in that guidelines for our students. Here we go. Hack number 1 for assessing our students and working on our IEPs. Observe your student and observe them first. We get so much information when we just sit and observe our students. And us as DHH specialists see things that nobody else really notices because we have that lens of hearing loss and what a student is getting and what they're missing. What I have on the screen for you here is a tool that the Online Itinerant created, and it's called the Observation Tool for the Mainstream Environment. This is a great assessment because you can go in and you can observe and you can just take notes on what you're seeing, and it is honed in exactly on observing kids with hearing loss inside the classroom. When you start with observation, you'll see what skills are generalized, what skills are not generalized, what things that maybe you would never see. You can see a kid's self-confidence in the classroom. You can get a sense of how they're doing socially, emotionally. You can get a nice pulse on that. And looking at grades and observing alone isn't going to be enough. We need some other assessments, but starting with this observation is going to be huge. Now, I actually have a special gift for you. If you are not a member of the Professional Academy, this is available to you for free. There is a link in this video's description to access this assessment for free. Okay. Hack number 1 is to make sure that you start with observation and stay as long as you can. Now, I do want to say, I do need to do a little plug on this. Again, this is a whole other training. But when you observe, you want to be very cautious that you are not obvious that you are observing. You do not want to stand in the back of the room with your tablet and your paper and just staring at your student and taking notes. That definitely creates an awkward environment for everybody. I build observation into all year long. I'm going to talk about how you can do that too. But when I am observing, kids have no idea that I'm observing because I'm walking around the room and I'm squatting down and I'm chatting with the other kids because I want to have conversation with them so that I can compare my student with how they're doing. But also it takes that stigma of who is this person and why is she watching us? And this is very awkward. I always want to make sure that my gen ed teacher would never say, "Oh, Miss Kessen is here to observe Patrick." No, we need to make sure that would never happen. So I always say to my teacher, "Can you just let the kids know that I'm just visiting the classroom and tell them I'm observing you?" That takes the pressure off them. And then I always say, "I'm not observing you." Just make sure that the teacher also knows that you are not observing her. But just become a member of that classroom community as much as you can. And while you're walking around the room, take some notes, but keep the environment as natural and as comfortable as possible. All right. When it is time for you to write your IEP goals, here is our hack. Use templates to be able to write your SMART goals and your reports. This is something that's really deeply embedded into the Professional Academy. I've got templates and report models and all kinds of things just to be able to save you time. But these IEP goals feel really challenging to write, especially when it comes to self-identity or self-advocacy, some of these skills that are hard to measure. I often come across an IEP and the goal will say the student will ask for repetition when they didn't understand something. 4 out of 5 times. And so you come in and you observe, they're maybe not the first to line up, but you don't know if they didn't understand or if they just didn't want to volunteer. So this is really hard to measure. This is in the professional academy. This is called the SMART IEP goal formula. If you follow this template, then you will have perfect IEP goals every single time. This is another example of a great template for you. This is, again, this is inside of the academy. Now, what the academy has is assessments, and inside the assessment, the results go directly to IEP goals for you. And then you can just copy and paste them and then modify them for your students. And then here is another example. This is from a report I'm going to talk about in a second that is going to help you identify service delivery minutes and how much time in special ed a student needs. So as many templates as you can get that helps you copy and paste, that is going to be a huge game changer for you. You take your results from the assessment and then it just plugs it right in for you, and it gives you the exact wording and report for you so that your report writing will just be so easy. Okay. Hack number 3. My hack to you is to use a rubric that is going to help you determine placement and services, but also, and here's the kicker, guide these hard conversations. Because hard conversations are hard. If you don't have sometimes the script or the evidence to bring it up or talk it through, then it can be extra hard. But we need this information so that we can share it. And I will say, if we have any parents watching this recording, I want to encourage these hard conversations. We know that two of the biggest influencers of how a child succeeds in life after graduation is their language development, but also their social and their emotional well-being. I strongly recommend a rubric that helps put you in a spot that says, okay, here is where we are at. And the recommendation is to talk about these services. And of course, I have one of those. This is the service delivery rubric. And I just want to show it to you really quickly because this particular rubric, it gives all the information that we need for a student to be able to thrive in the mainstream. And that's our key word right there, is to thrive in the mainstream. So we really look at their language skills, their language level. We want to know how much they wear their hearing technology. Is it only at school or is it all waking hours? What is their communication? How is their auditory processing? How can they converse with people back and forth? What's their literacy? All of these things that really build success, but it goes further. It goes into our functional classroom language skills. It goes into our self-advocacy and communication repair skills. We talk about our social and emotional behaviors, and then our school supports and what's going on inside the school, and then our academic considerations. And then from here, we go to additional considerations that maybe are not in any of those categories. And then we get a score. And then from that score, we can identify how much are they going to be able to comfortably acquire the language and the academics, and how much of the curriculum are they going to have access to. And if they need additional support, it says that the mainstream is not going to be the setting for that. Now, it does not specifically say, I know you want this. It does not specifically say this child needs 30 minutes 3 times a week from a teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing. And it doesn't say that because there are so many things that contribute to that. How coachable is the other special education staff? Is there an interpreter who can work with the student? Is there other special ed staff that kind of get this? So it stays away from that. But what it does discuss is the mainstream minutes and how much support. And it also has this area where if a student is at a certain level, then again, we need to have some of these hard conversations. Now, that's just an important conversation to have. That's where we start talking about what do we need to change to make sure that this child has got access. Last week we talked about sign language. We talked about what that might look like. I've been seeing on social media like crazy. We don't have an interpreter. We don't know what to do. I will say there is a huge interpreter shortage in our nation right now. I know that every single time I tell somebody what I do, people say, "Oh, I've always wanted to learn sign language." I have personally had some really great success saying, "Hey, you know what? There is a kiddo who is in desperate need of somebody who would sign with them. And our school will pay somebody to go and learn sign language to be able to communicate with this child." And almost every time I present that to people, then I end up finding somebody. Just a little plug for that little strategy. Okay, a little word about LRE. LRE stands for least restrictive environments. And again, we go back to our administration and their training about LRE is not honed in on the needs of students who don't have access to the language in the classroom or in their peers. Typically, the understanding of least restrictive environment is full inclusion or as much as possible. But it is very important that we understand that LRE is driven by a student's language, communication, and their academic and social needs. So an environment is restrictive unless it provides full and direct and clear access to meaningful language, communication, instruction, and social opportunities. So if you have a student who's in the mainstream because they need to be there because of LRE, but they don't have access, then this is actually not the least restrictive environment for them. So it's really important. Each local education agency must ensure that the continuum of educational placements is available. Now, when I graduated college a long time ago, the continuum of services for working with a deaf student was we had the residential school for the deaf, or we had a regional program that a student would hop on the bus and they would get a ride to, or it would be their general ed school, their classroom. That's what the continuum of services was. But these days, these other options are just not necessarily available or not necessarily talked about. So now people look at the mainstream, this neighborhood school, and they look inside of here and they put that continuum inside of the school. And they consider the special ed classroom as the more restrictive setting, and determining what kind of special ed classroom determines that continuum. But it's really important to understand that is not really the continuum for our students who have hearing loss. In fact, sometimes those special ed classrooms are the worst environments for our students because their peers are not appropriate peers for them. They don't have the same abilities and skills, and they're not models for our students. Or it's very disruptive and there's lots of distractions going on and there's kids that are in and out and lots of noise. And these are not good environments for our students. So we just really need to be able to have the conversation about what the least restrictive environment is going to be for our students. And again, this is talked about in that purple book. This may be foreign to your administration. And if it's foreign to them, it's not their fault. They just haven't ever been taught it. But once they get online, they will see that this is absolutely the legal definition of LRE when it comes to our deaf students. So if you consider LRE as standing for language rich environments, if you have a student who's in a language rich environment, then you know that probably is the least restrictive environment for them. So our goal should be to be immersing our kids in a language rich environment. And if that's not available, and I know sometimes that's not, you can't really ask a parent to move, right? But we just have to have those hard conversations about what can we do. I love the idea of getting peers online and getting the sign language classes. Really important that I point out some legal cases that have been instrumental in deaf education. So the first one is KM, the Tustin Unified School District. And this is two students who each of them were doing great in classes, but they requested CART, so captioning. Their school turned them down because their grades were really good. Well, the parents took him to court and they said it was denial of equal access. So under ADA, they took him to court and the family won because even though they were getting good grades, they were missing out on peer comments and discussion, and they were exhausted at the end of the day because they were working so hard. The court determined that they did not have equal access. So the court ruled in favor of the families. SP versus East Whittier City School District from 2018. This is a student who had a hearing loss, but they didn't qualify her under deaf and hard of hearing. They qualified her under speech and language. And so she got speech and language services. I think there was a DHH teacher who was just a consult, just came in and checked to see how things were going. That school got sued because they didn't consider all of her needs. She was actually having some significant social and emotional mental health issues, and it ended up coming back to her hearing loss. The school district did not consider all of her needs. The courts ruled against the school district. And then, of course, Perez versus Sturgis School District just a couple years ago. This is a student who needed sign language. They couldn't find an interpreter, so they got an aide who never became proficient in sign language, and they deemed that he did not have access to his instruction. The family actually sued under ADA and IDEA. So that was very different because he received extra schooling, but he also has received basically compensation for life because of the education that he missed out on because he didn't have somebody who signed with him throughout his day. So really important that our administration also is aware of these court cases that are specific towards our kids with hearing loss. Okay, I told you I was going to save my two favorite final hacks. Oh, quick commercial break before I do that. If you are enjoying this conversation and you just wish you could talk with other people and hang out and have these conversations all the time, I just want to tell you that the Online Itinerant is hosting the best conference ever. We're literally hosting a conference on a cruise ship. So if winter got a little long for you this year and you were like, oh my gosh, I just needed a little bit of sun in January, I want you to know that this is a conference that's going to be absolutely for you. And you want to check out the website for that. Okay, here we go. My favorite hack, I really advocate for being able to do what I call 3-in-1 services. That means for every 3 services that I do with my students, I have one set aside amount of time that is specific towards observation in the classroom. So what's fantastic about this? First of all, it gets me into the classroom so that I can observe. But let's pretend that something has happened that I have missed a service. So let's say I've got 3 services for 40 minutes for a month. I can split it up however I want. So maybe it's 5 minutes before I pull a student, or 5 minutes after I pull a student, or maybe it's 10 minutes here or 10 minutes there. But I just want to make sure that I am in and observing. And it gives me all kinds of flexibility to be able to collect data, see how the student is doing, and just be present with them inside the classroom. So that is a game changer in terms of time for you to have time to check your IEP goals, collect data, and even work on some of that paperwork. And then my next favorite one, oh, this is so great. The hack is include your students in your IEP rating. I love to bring my computer in, open up my computer and say, we've got an IEP coming up for you. Let's talk about your accommodations. And you tell me what you think you need. And I'm actually going to be writing it right now inside the accommodations. I like to start this a whole month in advance. And I'm doing all kinds of training about what is this IEP? What are we going to be talking about? And by the way, I would like for you to bring this up in the IEP meeting. And let's talk about your goals. What are we doing? And I literally will fill out the IEP paperwork and work on it when I'm with the student in their setting. So it saves me a ton of time. It builds their awareness on what this meeting is. It gives them this knowledge and this comfort level. And I like to say, hey, I would like for you to talk about this when you're at the meeting. I start that as early as possible. So I'll start that as early as elementary school. And then the dream, of course, is by the time they're in high school, they're pretty much leading the whole thing. If you've been doing this bit by bit every year, which is opening up that, doing that paperwork or working on some of it, obviously you can't do it all, but working on some of it when you've got your student present right there, it just is a huge time saver for you. All right. So a lot of these things that we talked about tonight is part of the Professional Academy Gold, which is everything that you need to really support you and help you thrive in this crazy field. So we've got trainings like crazy that are very digestible and in short little segments, but also all of these tools and assessments and this community. So if you are not a member of the Professional Academy, I want you to know that it is an option for you. This is just a little image of one section of the toolbox, which is the IEP goals, accommodations, and info. This is where the purple book is for you, but also policy clarification on the RTI that we talked about, the MTSS, and a lot of this other stuff that we talked about is embedded into this program called the Professional Academy. Included in that, if you are a newbie, or this is great for parents too, this is like a specific little workbook for if you are new into the field and just trying to figure out what does an IEP even mean, how is it different for a kiddo with hearing loss, then it walks you through that step by step for the unique differences for our students. You can get a free 3-day pass into the academies by following the link in the video description. You can check it all out and you can kind of access some of these tools and see if it is something that would be helpful for you. The best part about the Professional Academy is just the support and the community that you get. Otherwise, I hope everybody enjoyed the training. Thanks for listening.